Okay, so this is the Watercolor Techniques paper that you set up. I'm going to show you these techniques in two parts. The first for in video 1 and the second for in video 2. So I've already been painting so that you can see that my water looks kind of dirty, but I don't need to change it yet because when I go to paint it on white paper, it still looks pretty clear. When your water actually starts to appear like brown or gray when you paint it on white paper, then you need to change it. So first one, wet on dry. So this is just simply wet paint on dry paper. So get your paint all moist with a little water on your brush so that the paint is fluid. You don't want a giant pool of paint that fills up the whole paint well. You just want like a little bit of wet paint in there. So when you have dry paper, the paint is pretty much going to stay where you put it. It's not going to go all over the place. So if you want something that's very controlled, you might want to do wet on dry. So you can use the side of your brush to make a larger area, or you can use the tip of your brush to do a fine line or paint in a small area. So the next one is layering. And so what I'm going to do right now is just paint a couple of areas of color in this shape, and then I'm going to come back to it once it's dry and finish demonstrating this part. So layering involves having one layer of dry paint and then painting on top of it. So this is the way where you can still have sharp lines but have one color on top of another. Some people will call this glazing. You might hear that vocabulary as well. Okay, so I'm just going to paint that and come back to it once it's dry. For wet on wet, this applies for wet paper or wet paint. So I'm just going to paint water in this whole oval here. Not so much that there's big puddles sitting there, but enough that the paper is pretty damp. And now I'm going to take some colors and just try painting in that wet area and see what happens. So the paint doesn't exactly stay right where you put it, and it has like a soft fuzzy edge in comparison to the sharper edges when we paint it on the dry paper. And if two areas of wet paint get close to each other, they might bleed together, and that may be something that you want to happen, or it may be something that you don't want to happen. So just something to be aware of. If I don't mind that that red blends in with that orange, that's totally cool for me to put them close together. If you put too much paint down, you can kind of pick it back up with your brush, like get some of the extra water and paint off your brush and then come back in and remove some of the liquid, or you can get a little piece of paper towel and like dab at it to absorb the paint. Sometimes you can even like erase something that you didn't want to happen using a paper towel. And now we can also see what happens when we put wet paint on top of wet paint. Unpredictable effects. But it looks pretty cool. It just depends on what you want it to be like. Okay, so dark to light. There's probably going to be times when you want a darker version of a color and a lighter version of a color. The way that you achieve that is by having less water, more paint for the darker version, and more water, less paint for the lighter version. Okay, you can also add a little black if you want it to be very dark. So let me show you. I'll use blue. So I'm going to start by painting a bunch of blue on one side here. There's lots of different ways you could do this. You can do it wet paint on dry paper. You could do it wet on wet, whatever. So I'm just starting with some blue. And then I'm rinsing off my brush And I'm just going to kind of spread the blue paint out a little more to thin it down. You can already see how it's going to work. I'm just spreading it out so it's thinner and using more water to just bring the paint over. So I have like a gradation from dark to medium to light. And if I want it to be really dark, I can add a little bit of black. You want to be cautious with black paint and not add too much because it can look kind of blah, I guess, in a watercolor painting, and it can kind of take over. I'm just adding a little bit of black. So I'll come back in with a little bit more blue to try to smooth it out a little bit. There we go, dark to light. I think I'll have to show you the second part of this layering in the next video. So we'll stop now and we'll come back to that. And in the next video, we'll finish that and we'll do these other 4 techniques down here.